Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
Thank you, Race Hobbs, and it's true. It is Meanwhile Here on Earth, and I am your host, Peter Robbins. Tonight's show is one I have been looking forward to since our guest was first a guest on this show. Stanley Milford Jr. graduated from the United States Indian Police Academy at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Artesia, New Mexico, and worked continuously as a sworn law enforcement officer for over 23 years. He served as the delegated Chief Navajo Ranger for over 2 years, through March of 2019. While with the Navajo Rangers, Stan oversaw a section called the Special Projects Unit, SPU, whose responsibilities included the investigation of cases that did not fit within the everyday parameters of law enforcement or criminal investigation, many of which involved reports of the paranormal or supernatural. After leaving the Navajo Rangers, Stan served as the senior investigator for the Navajo Nation's white-collar crime unit. As a Native American with parents of both Navajo and Cherokee descent, Stanley Milford Jr. grew up in a world where the supernatural was both expected and taboo, where shapeshifters roamed, witchcraft was a thing to be feared, and children were taught not to whistle at night. In his youth, Milford never went looking for the paranormal, but it always seemed to find him. When he joined the fabled Navajo Rangers, a law enforcement branch of the Navajo Nation, who are equal parts police officers, archaeological conservationists, and historians, the paranormal became part of his job. Alongside addressing the mundane duties of overseeing the massive 27,000 square mile reservation, Milford was assigned to utterly bizarre and shockingly frequent cases involving mysterious livestock mutilations, skinwalker and Bigfoot sightings, UFOs, and malicious hauntings. The Paranormal Ranger, a Navajo investigator's search for the unexplained, is this Navajo Ranger's chilling and clear-eyed memoir of his investigations into bizarre cases of the paranormal and unexpected, and his account of what logic dictates should not be possible. It's a superb book, an extraordinary author, and Stanley Milford Jr., welcome back to Meanwhile Here on Earth, my friend.
Thank you, Peter. I'm glad to be here.
It's been quite a journey for you since we spoke last. Your book was officially published in October, and here we are at the very beginning of December, and the accolades that it has gathered and the reviews, the general reception of this book is really above and beyond. I would almost call it paranormal. The New York Times, which is not known for its fandom of UFOs and the paranormal subjects, named your book one of the 22 nonfiction books published in this country this year that was must-reading this autumn. So, it's so gratifying for me to have watched this phenomena. I can only imagine what it's been like for you. And we'll have plenty of time to discuss the book, its contents, some of what happened to you in the course of writing it. But I'd like to begin really at the beginning. Can you tell us a bit about your parents, your childhood, and your siblings, and what it was like for you growing up?
Sure. Um, so I was born on the Navajo Reservation in 60s, and my mother and father had met. So my mother is from Oklahoma, northeast Oklahoma, in what is referred to as green country. It's also referred to as the capital of the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma, Tahlequah, Oklahoma. In and around that town is where she grew up and spent most of her youth. And so between there and where my father was from on the Navajo Reservation, my father grew up primarily in a small town called Fort Defiance, which is where we were both born. And at the little, well, at the time it wasn't that big, but the Indian Health Service Hospital, IHS Hospital, that was governed by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. I believe that particular hospital was developed and built by one of the daughters of one of the last Navajo chief and first tribal chairman, who was, his name was Chi Dodge, and her name was Annie Wanika, and she was very famous for really adamantly pushing for unified health service throughout the Navajo Reservation. She was an amazing person, and in a time when women, women in childbirth, it was a very risky thing, and especially giving birth, without any nursing or anyone medically trained. She really pushed for the hospitals throughout the reservation, and she was an amazing person. So anyway, I was born there, and I grew up between those two places. Once, I came into this world, my mother and father weren't together for very long. I think I was about 2 years old when my mother chose to separate from my father and took me and my older sister Deborah, who is 5 years older than me, back to Oklahoma, and that's primarily where we lived and went to school, and going to school through the Oklahoma education system, and from, I would say, kindergarten through the 12th grade is when I graduated, and later went to school after that. But in the summer, my father would fly me and my older sister to and from Oklahoma out to the Navajo Reservation. We would fly from Tulsa, Oklahoma into Albuquerque, and Dad would pick us up, and we'd start the trek from Albuquerque out to the Navajo Reservation. And I always remember that being a very kind of magical transition from one world kind of into another world.
How would
Completely
you
different. So,
how would you characterize the difference between the two worlds, Stan?
well, growing up in Oklahoma, even though that is the Tahlequah is the capital of the Cherokee Nation, and the fact that Oklahoma, before becoming a state, was Oklahoma Territory, was the Indian Nations territory, and a home to a wide variety of Native American tribes, and so this Indian Territory is a home to many different Native American peoples: Cheyennes, Apache, the five civilized tribes, so to speak, the Cherokees, Choctaw, Seminole, and the Creek, and Kiowas, and many other different tribes that were more or less relocated to that location from their homelands, like the Cherokee, who traditionally come from the eastern side of the United States and in the area near Tennessee and the Carolinas, and were forced marched on the Trail of Tears to what is now Oklahoma, and similar to the Navajo being forced marched on the from their homelands out to Bosque Redondo. This really was kind of a genocide, the long walk of the Navajo, where they were forced by a cavalry detachment under threat of violence and gunfire, and many of those people in those tribes lost their lives. There were children that froze, pregnant women that were bayoneted, just much like the Holocaust with the Jewish people and under the Nazis.
Yes.
And a lot of people don't realize those atrocities happened on these lands that you and I walk in these cities today, but we've come a long way from those times.
While you're speaking, a number of questions are coming up in my mind.
Sure.
My first one, and I don't mean to pry, it's just a point of curiosity. Do you feel that a contributing factor to your parents' separation were their tribal differences, or it really didn't have anything to do with that?
So my father really was this character from the Navajo Nation that really he was larger than life. He played sports, all kinds of sports, but most notably he was a basketball player prior to, in high school years and in college years, and to the extreme. I mean, I always heard growing up people talking about my father playing basketball, and I really didn't understand that till one time he was getting ready to go to a tournament, and he said, I was maybe 9 or 10 years old, and he said, "Go, son, go with me I'm playing a tournament today." And we went to the Winter Rock Sports Center there in Winter Rock, Arizona, the capital of the Navajo Nation. And there was many basketball teams from throughout the reservation there. And so they started their tournament games. And at noon, they had a free throw tournament. And I watched my father get up there. He volunteered to go first in that free throw tournament. And I watched him get up there from the free throw line and shoot 100 free throws in a row and without missing. And the next person in line would get up and maybe make 20 free throws and then miss one, and that'd be out. And my father took the top trophy in that free throw, and this thing was taller than I was, and it was hanging out the window of the car going home. And that's when I really began to realize, this connection with my dad and him being extraordinary in his ability in sports, and something that I didn't really get, growing up. Yeah, I played sports in junior high and high school, but I discovered girls and a guitar at electric guitar by the time before I was out of high school. I was into the rock stuff and Aerosmith and Kiss and those bands, and that took me a completely different direction. At that point. As opposed to getting hit by those big farm boys, I was a wide receiver and I could run like the wind, but man, when I would get hit, they'd have to pull me out of the ground practically, because those farm boys that would big, 200 something pounds, and and they would clobber me, and I realized that that wasn't my path after being hit a couple of times, So
Um,
I've
I'm
always had a love for music. My mother, she was my life with my mother was also like a music appreciation class from the
ah
time I was little. I mean, she had a huge collection of vinyl albums.
yeah,
I mean, hundreds and hundreds of uh, albums, going back from Motown and bands like Beatles and Rolling Stones, and I grew up with that, and it really had a great impact even to this day with me and
yes,
my sister Deborah, because we love all kinds of music, and
yeah.
and I still play guitar my mother bought me a guitar when I was about 9 or 10, and I continue to enjoy playing guitar and music, and so yeah.
I have a question for you that in this crazy world we're living in, and America being a country where we're at odds with each other, no secret there. And
Mhm.
one of the, I guess, philosophic constructs is we're a young country. We have a very colorful history. Um,
Right.
there is a faction of folks that feel we should be learning primarily the best about American history and not focusing in on, the awkward passages like the genocide of the Indian nations. Other folks feel that this should be something that is taught, for kids growing up at whatever level. When I was in elementary school and even junior high, um, it was still a very simple, kind of anesthetized um, sketch that was presented to us as part of American history. Yeah, we had the Indian Wars, but basically it all sorted itself out somehow. Well, it really didn't. And I'm wondering, for you, growing up on the reservation or in Indian culture, and excuse me for not saying Native American, the friends I've made over the years who are Native American, um, when asked about it by white people overall,
Mhm.
have kind of smiled and said, we understand the irony of being called Indians. We are not in India, but that's the name that
Right.
we've become, calling ourselves. What I wanted to know is, was this something that Indian children were actively taught in school about the Trail of Tears and the genocides and the extermination of the buffalo, or was it something that you learned at home, or partly both?
um, in public schools, you look at the curriculum, and for the most part there is an approach that is to be politically correct, I think, with addressing things like genocide and what had happened to native peoples, indigenous peoples early on in this country and in other countries. And I liken it to similar to how we have been uh, brainwashed, in that Roswell is just a fable, and people fabricated that, and simply to allow the government to control the information that has come out of that particular incident. you
Yeah.
know you and I know very clearly that incident happened, and so for native peoples, even discussing, right now everything is disclosure this, disclosure that, as far as UFOs and stuff. But for native peoples, I mean, you could come out here to the reservation. I can take you out to Canyon de Chelly. You can look at the canyon walls with the petroglyphs and all of that, pictographs, and in throughout this region, Southwest region, from here to California. And it's very clear that we have had these visitations from entities from other worlds, probably long before mankind even came to walk this planet. And
I think you're right.
so, as far as disclosure, that they missed it by hundreds, if not maybe thousands of years, and so that, it is what it is, today. And I try not to dwell upon those things and not dismissing what has happened. I mean, the same with the Holocaust with the Jewish people. I mean,
Yes.
for me, you can't dismiss that. It's not possible.
Yeah.
You, given the amount of loss of life,
Yes.
and for me, like when I look at what's going on in the Middle East and in Gaza, and
Yeah.
for the loss of one child's life is too much. It's too much at that point. And because that life is too precious, and to be able to write that off, to say, well, for us to move forward, and no, there's other means. I mean, our Creator gave us the ability to reason and compromise with each other to achieve an agreed upon goal, and the loss of that life is not, it's not acceptable. Not one life. And the same goes for what is happening in Ukraine and Russia. One little child's life is too much. One elderly person's life is too much. And there are other ways to solve these problems besides using cruise missiles and stuff like that on civilian targets. And so we need to, as human race, we really need to step back and look at the way we're living our lives, the way that we're treating this little blue marble here. We only, the resources here on this planet they're not infinite. The resources like water and oxygen and our forests, they're not infinite. And we need to take care of this little planet the best that we can, superseding, greed and corporations and all of this other stuff that we have today. In Native teachings, there is this concept, an idea of balance, harmony. In the Navajo, that is referred to as hajo, and it means having balance in every aspect of your life, whether it's your spiritual life or how you eat. Diabetes in many tribes is rampant, and but you should live your life, in a way that everything has balance to it. I mean, even things like alcoholism on the reservations is rampant, but it's not that alcohol is evil or demonic, or it's simply using the common sense that your Creator gave you to be able to not let these things control your life. You make the decision. You decide what's best for you each and every day. And I think we really need to get back to that kind of thing. And I like with the book, I think people need to open their eyes that these phenomenon that we see and call paranormal, as my sister says, paranormal is normal. That we inherited a paranormal world, coming onto Earth, and it was already there, and to be respectful of these things.
You remind me, number one, whoever the aggressor is in history, it's necessary to dehumanize your enemy, at least to some degree, so you can, get popular support. Well, they don't have a soul, or, they're savages, or, you know, and we see it all through history. And
Right. We
the
do.
caricature of World War II, of how the Japanese, who were definitely our enemy, who had attacked us, and we fought them along with the Germans, etc. That if you look at political cartoons or even cartoons at the time, how exaggerated and making fun of them as something less than human. On a completely other tack, I realized early on that I have something in common with your mother, in that for several summers in the late 1980s, I was hired by the Oklahoma Council on the Arts to take part in an arts program that was centered in northeastern Oklahoma, in Bartlesville, which at the time was the corporate headquarters for Phillips Petroleum. And I learned fairly early on that my students, teenagers, all great kids and very game for the program. I taught painting and drawing. They brought in other people in the arts to teach other things. But that I realized early on that my kids were either the sons and daughters or grandchildren of Phillips Petroleum executives or engineers who had settled in Bartlesville, or they were Cherokee, or they were Osage. And the way I learned to kind of tell the difference, so to say, between the Osage kids and the Cherokee kids, which kind of caught up with me many years later in reading and then watching the film version of Killers of the Orchid Moon.
Flower Moon.
Yeah.
Flower Moon.
Ugly story, and very well told. Was the Cherokee kids were considerably poorer because that piece of land that they had was pretty barren. The Osage kids, of course, that reservation turned out to be very oil rich, and they had very different lifestyles. It was a quirky way to get that piece of education. But
I experienced that firsthand going to Haskell Indian Junior College. It was a junior college at that time. It's university now in Lawrence, Kansas. And us Navajos and Cherokees, we'd be robbing noodles. And some of these students from Alaska, they were having fresh crab and salmon flown in. They'd have closets full of, these Nike Air Jordan shoes. And so, I got to see that firsthand. The trick was to make good friends with those, one of those Alaskans that my roommate in one dorm, he always treated me really well, and he would have all kinds of fancy stuff flown in. But I got to see that reality, kind of, and I probably shouldn't be laughing here, but it was something that I learned from, and to me, everything that I've experienced in my life, I look at, good or bad, I look at it as a learning experience, and I wouldn't want it any other way. I learned from, I grew up, not wealthy for sure, but I never did without. My mother always had a roof over our head, and we were kept warm during wintertime, and my mother could cook like she learned from her mother, who was a Southern cook, and they could cook, anything, and unbelievably in the culinary stuff.
Stan, talking about the paranormal, it's a phrase, that is part of our regular vocabulary, but to dissect it for a moment, we have what we'll laughingly call normal, a term that is very difficult to pin down. And for some people, there is a parallel in life of things that are non-standard, even to the point that they seem impossible, except, as I sometimes find myself saying, reality doesn't care what we think. What is, is. And I'm curious to know, at what point in your life did you have an experience, either as a very young child or a boy, or on your own, or with the family, or with friends, that you had an experience that you would look back and say, I guess that was my first paranormal experience?
Yeah. Um, there was one experience that really stood out for me in my latter teens. My mother and father, stepmother, my stepfather, my mother, they were part of a commercial trucking company. And so they would be out on the road sometimes for like 2 weeks. And during my summer break, I would look after my younger sister, Stephanie, and sometimes my little sister, Lisa. And but I can remember being at home one time when it was me and Stephanie, and we were watching TV in the front part of my mother's home, and I guess it's a living room that connected with a family room, and then there was the kitchen down below that, and that kind of stepped down, and we were watching TV late one evening. Uh, all the lights were out except really for the TV screen. We were watching TV. My sister was laying on the floor, on the carpeted floor, and I was sitting on the couch, and I happened to look down toward the kitchen area, and because there was something that caught my eye, and there was light down that way, and I got up and went to check what this was, and this was an older home that had been completely renovated, and but the stove, the range stove, their oven was an older stove, and the range top on it was one of those that it had the large knobs on the front of it, and it really took some effort to crank those knobs to turn the gas on, the LP gas, and you'd have to strike a match and to actually light the burners. And when I stepped into the kitchen, all four burners on that range were lit. They were turned on. And I knew my younger sister hadn't done it. And she didn't really mess with the stove. I did the cooking when we were there, and she had been in the front room watching TV for quite some time, and she hadn't done it, and I hadn't done it, and immediately, I didn't know if someone had broke into the house and for some reason had lit that range, but I ended up grabbing a firearm, and checked all the rooms downstairs, and all of the windows and doors were secure, and I ended up going upstairs and clearing all of that area, much like I would later do in my law enforcement career of clearing a house or whatever building, searching for an adversary or a suspect. But I cleared it, and it was still secure there. And for me, trying to comprehend how and why that range was lit, and there was nobody in the household that had done that. I hadn't done it. My sister hadn't done it. There was some other force or some other that had caused this to happen, and that was one of the early experiences that was very day and night clear, that happened, really right in front of me, that I couldn't explain, and even to this day, I don't know how it happened, and I don't. Although there were other things that happened within that home later on that there was something there within that home. It was an older home built maybe in the 1920s or 30s, and the foundation of that home, and even though it was very modernized, but beautiful home. I never really felt anything that you would classify as evil or at that level within that home. I always was very comfortable in that home, and so I don't know, but that was one of the early experiences in my latter teen years.
Do you remember the first time you heard the term either UFO or unidentified flying object, and what the context was, and whether or not it was more in a nativist spirit or hard metal machine from outer space that the military is interested in? I'm curious the formation of how that began, that interest
I
around that
think,
subject.
you know, often the term orb is closely associated with UFO activities or
Yeah,
extraterrestrial activities, although it transcends even UFO phenomenon into paranormal, like hauntings and the
yes,
witchcraft thing.
yeah,
It can be associated with skinwalkers on Navajo and other shape-shifting entities with other indigenous peoples and other
yeah.
tribes. Hauntings, ghostly apparitions. There's often orbs, and I've witnessed, orbs. But my mother had a story of, so my grandfather on my mom's side, he had run a country store in one of the what was called the hollers of Oklahoma, in the Cookson Hills, and back in that back country, rural country, he ran a country store that catered to the Cherokee and other tribal people, and they had gone to town into Tahlequah one day to get all the supplies for the store, and were headed back. And she had a number of brothers and sisters, my aunts and uncles, in and around her age and maybe a little older, and they were all riding in his Chevrolet truck, and my grandmother was sitting up front with the littlest ones. And as it was getting late in the evening and they were getting close to home, they came upon this orb that was high above this tree out in this field. And it was said my uh, grandfather brought the truck to a stop, and he got out, and he actually walked across that field over to near where this orb was hovering. And as they got close to underneath it, it vanished. It disappeared. And then he started to walk back toward the truck, and it would re-illuminate. And it was bigger than a basketball and bright yellowish orange and really intense. And that was occurring at a time in the 50s when there was no rural
Right.
electricity. You didn't have power lines and street lamps and things of that nature. And there wasn't really that kind of technology that we might see today to cause that kind of uh, um, visual appearance. So, like a drone or something like that. And
Yeah.
so that was an experience early on that my mother talked about, and um, very, and she had a lot of other stories that she spoke of. A lot of these things, though, I couldn't really connect with growing up as a child. A lot of it, like the shape shifting stuff, I took as legend or folktale or something like that, until I actually witnessed the shape shifting entity or creature, and with my own eyes, and it really changed my worldview or universe view. Seeing that, and along later on with witnessing what people refer to as a Sasquatch or Bigfoot, and UFO activity, and seeing these things firsthand. A lot of people will be very skeptical, and I can say I was too, I would guess. But at that point that you encounter these phenomena firsthand in front of you,
Yeah.
it's life changing. And at that point, you no longer will discredit those people that have had these experiences and stuff like that. So,
Stan, as a boy, elementary school into adolescence, were you much of a reader? And if so, what kind of reading material were you drawn to?
I did read a lot, and like I mentioned earlier, my father did have a wide collection of different books, but a lot of it was, as what you mentioned earlier, with Native American history, different tribes, the different leaders of different tribes, and learning about the history of other peoples throughout this country and other indigenous peoples worldwide. But there were also those books like Eric von Daniken, Chariots of the Gods. And there were books that talked about things like the Stephenville, Texas UFO incident
Yep.
and McMinnville incident, up in
Yep.
Oregon, and other things that were there. So I think it, seeing that, it was amazing that, I never imagined that I would be investigating those kind of things later on in my life. But in doing those investigations, in my adulthood, I could go back in my mind and realize, hey, I read about something like that when I was a kid, and to actually investigate a case that had similar elements and phenomenon and stuff.
Yeah.
But I never really set out that I had this interest that, I want to go investigate this. John and I never looked at each other as being ghost hunters or Bigfoot hunters or that kind of thing. We were simply assigned by the chief that this was our assignment, and we were already part of a project unit that
Right.
that dealt with high profile and sensitive case. We were SWAT team leaders and commanders and dignitary protection and all of that kind of thing that we managed and took care of. And this was just another one of those things.
Did you have a thought when you were a kid about what you wanted to become?
Well,
it probably was not this.
Growing up in Oklahoma, one of my uncles, he was married to this woman who, her father he owned a construction company. He was wealthy, and he had a lot of land, and they had land there in Oklahoma where they had a several thousand-acre ranch, and
Wow.
they ran, a lot of cattle industry on that ranch, and probably thousands of head of cattle, a couple of thousand head of cattle. But me and my cousin, my older cousin Rusty, who was about a year or so older than me, he had motorcycles, motocross bikes, and he and I would be racing all over that ranch, playing cops and robbers at 9 and 10 years old, and one of the big things was the TV series Starsky and Hutch. Had a huge influence on me in the 70s, and along with Adam 12 and Dragnet and all of those rescue and SWAT, and
yeah.
So I think that began building this idea, and to want to be possibly a law enforcement officer, and because at the time I was going to school at the University of Arizona when the director of the parks reached out to me to make the offer to become a ranger, to work in Monument Valley and come back and go to the Federal Police Academy. And I had been accepted to a pre-med program at the University of Arizona, and I'd started that program, and I had a full ride grant, that I had, and so it but I think at the time that he called me and said, would you consider, coming back and become a ranger? I had told him, I said, well, I'll have to think about it. This is a big move, and I'll let you know next week. And this is probably on a Friday, but actually I'd already made that decision at the point that he called me. I played it cool and told him, yeah, I'll get back with you, but I'd already made a decision. And the following week I called him up and I said, yeah, I'll take you up on your offer. I'll
Wow.
come back and go to the academy and pursue, to be a law enforcement officer. And that's what I did.
What was the training like, Stan? And in the training, did they give you any hint that there would be some specifically non-standard possibilities in the work that would come up?
The Federal Police Academy was very regimented. I probably had 4 or 5 sergeants that were overseeing the academy, and they were, all of them were with the BIA, or Bureau of Indian Affairs, law enforcement section. They were, they wore their hair high and tight, and all were prior Army drill sergeants or Marines, and so they were dressed immaculate. Nothing was ever out of place with any of those sergeants. And they later on went to be like directors of the Bureau of Indian Affairs Academy, but they really, they ran it like military, and from the very beginning, I talk about it in the book, and they didn't let you get away with a whole lot there at the academy, and I was very appreciative of that, because today some of these academies, they let people that shouldn't be in law enforcement get through the academy, and I don't think that's appropriate. I think there's a weeding out process for getting rid of people that have no business being law enforcement officers.
Yeah.
And I don't agree with that. I think it takes a special person to do the kind of work that you will face as a law enforcement officer, keeping yourself alive and keeping the people that you serve alive and protecting them and making those sacrifices to protect those people. And we did that. So there was no forethought to getting into the paranormal up until early on. I actually began having my own cases involving the paranormal and seeing this firsthand.
Monument Valley is one of the most iconic locations, I'll say, in the world, because of the history of American film. It is been captured since the days of early silent films, and certainly some of the greatest Westerns of all time have those locations.
John Ford and John Wayne, they cemented that Monument Valley iconic image of the mittens and Merrick Butte, and it led to the highway systems, paved highway systems throughout the reservation, which at that time it increased the tourism that began happening in that area. People in this country wanted to travel out and see these areas where these films were made, and
the famous Route 66.
Exactly.
You and I were very fortunate to have a good friend in the form of a gentleman named Clifford Mahudi.
Yes.
Clifford was a Zuni tribal elder who did his best to try to take some of that knowledge and share it with white culture among other people. And that was not generally agreed on as something that the tribal elders wanted, and he lost his place. He was excommunicated. And he changed my life considerably in some ways. And
same here.
I can't think of him without smiling. And at the same time, when we all have people in our lives who, I mean, everybody's going to die, but we all have people in our lives who, not them,
Yeah.
they're rock solid. I can
Right.
always,
All right.
and I, it's a silly thing to say, but
Yeah.
sometimes we take it personally. It's
Right.
like,
Oh yeah.
wait a minute, not
Right.
yet, no. And
No.
one of the things with Clifford was, when you can come out to Arizona, I will take you on a tour of Monument
Right.
Valley. And I thought, I think the
Yeah.
only way I'm going to be able to do this with him now is after I die, and then we can do it together. But in the meantime, you and I met. Well, and Jonathan. Let's talk about John a bit, because
Yeah.
he was your partner. And how did
Right.
you meet? And he was more senior to you. Tell
Right.
us a bit about how you met and some of about your relationship and what you learned from him over the years.
Yeah. John, like you said, he was senior to me coming on. I came on the academy out of the academy in 1997, but John probably had a good 10 or 15-year head start of me. I mean, he began as a police officer with the city of Winslow and later applied to being a Navajo Ranger. Worked as a Navajo Ranger for quite some time. Started his own law enforcement section under the archaeology department of the Navajo Nation with federal funding. And that program was there for a while. Then later on, he came back to the Navajo Rangers. And soon after that, that is when I had heard of him, at, at the time that I came on with the department. He had a reputation of being, John knew pretty much everything there was in regards to law enforcement and resource enforcement on the Navajo reservation. He was really a walking encyclopedia. And so at the time that him and I began working together under special projects and working hand in hand, doing archaeological investigation and dignitary protection and all kinds of things like that. We were sworn as Utah State police officers and worked the 2002 Winter Olympics together and
Oh,
a lot of different assignments and uh, really became brothers over the years and working together because we knew that we could depend on each other, even with our own lives if we had to.
yeah.
So we develop a close bond, and he and I are like brothers today. To this very day, we'll help each other out. He and I just got back from Albuquerque yesterday, being up there a couple of days to take care of some tasks he needed to do, and we go to LA. He'll go out to LA to film sometimes, and with Ancient Aliens, and his mother still lives in California, and brothers and sisters, and I'll tag along to spend time with them. I've grown close with his family too, and
Wonderful.
so a lot of times when when his girlfriend can't go with him, I'll get in there by default and help him drive and enjoy a little vacation going to California.
We
And
met 10 years ago, almost to the month, and it was in Heber, Arizona, for Travis Walton's first conference. And
right.
a shot, I love you guys. This is at breakfast.
Yeah.
We had a wonderful setup. We had been
Yeah.
speakers and things that would given a terrific kind of bunkhouse, but very
Right.
luxurious.
Oh
And
yeah.
another one of our colleagues, I thought,
Yes.
well, we
Stanton.
have several worlds meeting right here.
Right. Oh, definitely. Stanton was amazing, and there's
Truly.
just no words. He's another, like Clifford. They broke the mold when they made those two, and I really love learning from both of them because
Yeah,
a wide
perfectly stated.
range of knowledge. Yeah, and it was magical, like you said. What Travis put together, bringing everyone together,
It
the
was.
accommodations, and I'll never forget that. Never,
No,
I'll take
I
that.
agree. And the great fun of connecting with you guys, I was tremendously curious about, well, the same things I am asking you about now, about growing up in a
Yeah,
world that was completely alien to me. And
right.
I remember what fun we had when I realized that you guys were enjoying some of my family background, that my grandmother
Yeah.
had grown up with the Marx Brothers. And I thought, boy, we
Oh yeah.
really are coming together from
Right.
different universes here, but having a great deal of fun doing it.
Definitely. Yeah.
Believe it or
It's
not,
amazing. It's amazing how all of this came together,
yeah.
and
And
without forcing it. I mean, these things just were meant to happen, and I'm very
I think
blessed. And
the work that we do have some extraordinary experiences, but really the people we get to meet, some of the
right,
friendships that we get to make,
right,
some of the adventures that we have are
right.
priceless. And believe it or
They
not,
are.
we have blown through our first hour. This is Peter Robbins. My guest is Stanley Milford Jr. The show is Meanwhile Here on Earth, and we will be back in 4 minutes. Stick around.
While most near-death experiencers return to this plane of existence with alluring tales of their time spent in the presence of the divine, what happens when one crosses the veil into the afterlife, into the void? In the new book, Dying to Meet Them, Mindy Toutfest describes her journey to the afterlife after a devastating aneurysm, how a strange turn of events would lead her to spiritual growth, divine healing, UFO experiences, and a greater understanding of the universe. Get your copy of Dying to Meet Them today at Amazon.com or visit unxmedia.com for more information on this book and more amazing selections from UnX Media Publishing at unxmedia.com.
Unlock the mysteries of the spirit realm with the new book, Meeting Wallace. In this channeled work by renowned psychic medium Larry Costa, the reader will delve into the profound wisdom of his spirit guide, Wallace. Together, they share the transformative journey of harnessing psychic powers from the celestial plane. Discover the extraordinary psychic gifts that have empowered Larry on his path, and immerse yourself in a thought-provoking and awe-inspiring read. Meeting Wallace is a groundbreaking endeavor, and it is a perspective seen through the eyes of a spirit guide. Discover the wisdom of the spirit realm alongside actual photographs of ghosts and spirit guides. Get the book Meeting Wallace by Larry Costa at Amazon.com.
The UnX Network classes and workshops are enrolling now for 2025. If you're interested in psychic protection, chakra balancing, dowsing, or perhaps healing with sound and music, visit unxnetwork.com to see our complete series of live and on-demand classes and workshops hosted by the one and only Margie Kay. For example, in January 2025, you could spend 4 Saturdays with Margie for her exclusive live remote viewing workshop. Margie Kay is one of the most accomplished remote viewers in the world, and she will share her secrets and totally unique methods in this course. Some courses are open now. Seating is limited for these live courses, so register now at unxnetwork.com. UnX members use promo code XMEM for an additional 15% discount.
This is Margie Kay, and I'd like to say thank you to all of our KUNX show hosts, staff, listeners, and viewers for making us number 1 on Paranormal Talk Radio.
And we are back. Peter Robbins here, and my special guest, Stanley Milford Jr. And my cat Juno has just erased a certain amount of the dialogue that I was going to be jumping back into. So thank you, Juno, very much. And we'll wing it to a certain degree. Stan, okay, you didn't erase it all. Good boy. Besides, kind of the focus of your book, of course, and what I think most people are going to be drawn to are the non-standard, the paranormal, the unusual, the exotic. But there's an awful lot of regulation police work involved in what you did over the years. You were a firearms instructor. You were involved in drugs and not involved in drug intervention and gang violence. There were times, is it fair to assume that your life was in question because of some of the situations you got into, like law enforcement officers do?
Definitely. So with both John and I, we've always had a close connection with the spiritual side of the universe from a very young age. I mean, I've had a really strong faith from the time I was a child. I mean, I could disappear into those woods there in Northeast Oklahoma. Even at times I'd be out there after dark and being chased inside by my mom. And I didn't have, that the average fear that I think a lot of children my same age had. And this carried throughout my life, I I was part daredevil when I was a young kid and doing some crazy things and like riding motorcycles and dirt bikes and jumping and those things and rock climbing and all kinds of things like that growing up. But I think getting into law enforcement and really from the get-go, I worked an assignment that was referred to as the Four Corners Manhunt, where there was a Cortez police officer that was murdered by 3 militia individuals, and it led to the largest manhunt in the Southwest at the time in 1998, early 1998. And I was drawn into that by the Navajo Police, which requested my assistance, and I jumped into it with both feet. And it led to me being, a SWAT team officer working those assignments. A lot of times, I wasn't preoccupied and worried about my own safety. I was most of the time focused on the mission at hand, and you relied on your training to get you through those situations, even at times when you're being shot at, and not focusing on the risks so that carried on even into dealing, I think, with the paranormal, investigating the paranormal, where even though I would be dealing with cases, let's say, that had a demonic component or something that was very clearly evil, you didn't focus on the risk, and hazards with that. You stayed focused on the mission at hand, and you put that in, your life and your safety in the hands of the Creator, and let Him take care of those kind of things. And you take care of the earthly things that you needed to do, the task at hand. So,
Can you tell us the first time working with Jonathan as your partner that you were assigned to a case that was decidedly paranormal in that it related to, like you just said, a malicious force or a skinwalker or a Yeti or Sasquatch kind of being or a UFO? Do you remember the first time that you dealt with that within the Navajo Rangers?
I remember when the first case that John and I put together, this was happening, a lot of this was happening after 9/11, after the events in New York City, by the terrorist attacks. And what followed that was the president at that time implemented what was known as the National Incident Management System, or NIMS, and also the use of the ICS system, Incident Command System. And so this was an entire system, a process, and written process and guidelines in how to deal with all kinds of incidents. And so John and I early on learned, we're learning those processes, even like at the Winter Olympics up in Utah, in 2002,
2002. Yeah.
where you were working with a command of FBI and other law enforcement agencies, but we adapted those processes as much as we could in adapting it to the investigations, like a Bigfoot case. And there was one case along the San Juan River which has been kind of shown and detailed in what people have seen with the television series Unsolved Mysteries, the Paranormal Rangers episode. I think it was season 3, episode 5 on Netflix, Unsolved Mysteries. And in there was a case along the San Juan River where there was a family and other families that had to witness what people refer to as a Bigfoot. And John and I pulled together a team that included our SWAT team personnel to actually go into the field at that location and spend several days actually out in that jungle-like terrain and traversing the river bottoms, and much like what I did when I was working not too far from that area with the Four Corners Manhunt, and collecting evidence, related to this Bigfoot sighting, and that was really one of the first. There was one earlier than that, but that was the one where we involved our entire SWAT team. I think there was seven personnel on that team at the time, and so yeah, that was one.
Do you remember, within the context of your being a law enforcement officer, of actually having a UFO sighting, either with your partner, with people you were interacting with, or on your own, out in Monument Valley or somewhere in the 27,000 square miles, but a memorable, I don't know what that is, it does not fit into.
Yeah. So when I was first requested to assist the Navajo Police on the Four Corners Manhunt in 1998, when I was assigned to other SWAT team members to utilize what was called an OP, or observation point, we did a night watch, and we were afforded some really expensive, high-tech ITT night vision equipment that was comparable to what the military was using in the Desert Storm and the Middle East theater. And this equipment, it was really the first time I got to see and utilize equipment of that quality, and it allowed me to witness an object that was not commercial aircraft, fixed wing or rotary wing. It wasn't a drone. This equipment allowed me to witness something that was, I felt, not of this world. And it coincided in its appearance by something that John and I later witnessed along the San Juan River when we were searching for a person who had drowned on the San Juan River, and we were doing a recovery and effort and search and recovery. And when we camped out one night, we witnessed an object that came zigzagging across the sky, followed by two F-16 fighter planes, and it kept a sharp zigzag pattern until it got about the 12 noon position, and all of a sudden it accelerated to what would have to be thousands of miles an hour, going from the 12 noon position, like I said, to the edge of the horizon in about a second and a half. And it left the F-16s more or less standing where they had been, and seeing something operate at that otherworldly speed was mind-boggling. But John and I both witnessed that.
It's one thing for any of us, but in particular, a professional law enforcement personnel, to deal with an individual in crisis, in shock, in grief, or in deep anxiety. At the same time, the role that a lot of people envision law enforcement, you're tough. There's not a lot of latitude, kind of the equivalent of Jack Webb in Dragnet. As an actor, he defined a very particularly stiff kind of style that affected, right, I think, the way popular culture thought about law enforcement, where, a good cop, like any good person, has to be able to move into that area of empathy, extreme empathy, right, sometimes.
Right.
Kindness, being whatever that person needs in that moment, right, without losing their grip of the situation. And I'm imagining if the individual or individuals in question, if the source of their trauma or upset or the reason that you're interfacing with them is something paranormal that's completely outside of their experience,
right,
it has to be a very special line that you have to walk. Do you remember a time when you were dealing with folks, or you and Jonathan, who specifically the area that they were reacting to or in shock about, or the source of their anxiety was what we would simply call paranormal rather than a, right, normal,
right?
Can you an example of that, Stan?
Well, at the time that John and I were assigned to this special projects unit specifically for investigation of paranormal,
yeah,
John and I didn't volunteer for that. There was a case where there were two younger rangers that were called into an assignment involving an elderly woman and what she described as a Bigfoot. And one of these particular rangers was what I would liken to as a comedian, because everything he did and everything he said, he was laughing and joking and carrying on. And I think this elderly grandmother was kind of offended by overhearing him laughing and carrying on.
Yeah.
Assuming that he wasn't taking this particular case or incident serious. And the chief called a department-wide meeting, and he said, you've chosen a career and have sworn an oath to do one of two things, either to help people or to protect people, or a combination of both of those two things. Right. And he said, you're going to do that. He said, that's what we're here for. And he said, you may not understand these kind of cases that people are referring to, the witchcraft and the UFOs and Bigfoot stuff. You may not understand that, and you may not believe it, but to these people, it is very much real, and they're asking for help. They're reaching out for help. And with other agencies, they're not getting that. But we are going to do that. And he looks over to me and John and points the fingers at us. And he said, and you two are going to oversee these cases and conduct these investigations and manage it. And we were, yes, sir. And that's the answer we would give him on any of the assignments that he gave us. It was yes, sir. And we would dedicate ourselves 110% to whatever it was that assignment that he gave us. So, there was those cases. I remember of a case of these two really little girls, 10 and 11 years old, that they would get off at their school bus stop and have to walk about a mile to their home, on this little small trail, and they were, in their opinion, were chased or pursued by this Bigfoot from near where they got off of the school bus all the way home. And they were completely traumatized by this incident, where when they got home, the uncle who was home at the time couldn't even get out of them what had happened. And it took a while coaxing them for them to explain what had happened. And he ran out there after he got that, and he actually witnessed what it was they experienced. This thing that was larger than a man and covered in hair, and wow. With the typical descriptions of these things. And so these girls were traumatized. There was other cases where I had like a 14-year-old girl who witnessed one of these things across their garden or their field. And again, she was traumatized. She was, even a day or so after that, she was still shaking from that and didn't want to leave her mother's side. And gradually working with her, I think she was able to overcome the fear of this entity. And so it does happen. And even not only with young people, but even those in their 80s, having seen or witnessed these things, whether it's a Bigfoot or haunting or UFOs, and it can be very traumatizing. But we were there to try to help people.
The two younger officers you described, the one who's kind of has a comedian attitude.
Oh yeah.
We all know people who their way of reacting to stress situations is right. They get jokey. It's a defense mechanism, and not a bad one. But right. Bud Hopkins used to point out sometimes, at a time that was less friendly to the idea of people actually having UFO-related experiences, that to go public with a contact experience or a UFO-related abduction experience in our culture takes a certain kind of courage to become public about something that many people think they know is nonsense or explainable in some way. And that for that person, when somebody responds to that behavior, courageous and putting yourself on the line with humor or with sarcasm or with outright disdain, it's like getting hit a second time. And a rational person who's listening to us, but they've never had an experience with a a Bigfoot or a UFO or another intelligence or a ghost, even if they're open-minded, they may be saying, well, these two little girls, it's given the likelihood of a genuine Sasquatch or overactive imaginations, with respect to them, and children, dream and they all have fantasy lives.
Right.
The level of insult implied in behavior that's driven by, I can't accept this. This is a big effing problem for me. If it's real, all this stuff, then everything I thought I knew is open to question. And frankly, I'd rather attack somebody as making something up. I'm sorry, if it hurts their feelings, but for me, it's far preferable that you're spinning a yarn than that you're telling the truth. So I'm going to remain a skeptic on this. Just that ability to, again, doesn't matter what you believe. You are in a crucially unique role with a person in trauma, and you can signal them in so many words. Look, I'm not sure if I take this seriously, but you seem like a nice person, and we'll look into this, as opposed to respect, empathy, and the understanding that anything is possible, given the parameters that just we in our lives have experienced and known. And it doesn't cost anything to be kind, whether or not it's in law enforcement or just being a human being. Did you and Jonathan, on your own or again with other individuals, encounter a presence that we can call an apparition, something that is you saw with your own eyes that might fit into the Bigfoot or skinwalker or gray alien or ghost category? And how, if so, did you manage your own feelings about what you were seeing with your own eyes, Stan?
Yeah. Well, one of the investigations that I had conducted was a haunting related case that involved an office space, and one of the things that occurred, the phenomenon that occurred within that case, was coins would materialize or manifest out of thin air. They would fall out of the air into the floor, and to actually witness this phenomenon repeatedly over and over, like for me, during that original investigation, a total of 66 coins manifested, and I was able to witness at least 10 of them with my own eyes, seeing the coins just fall out of nothingness, out of thin air. And nobody around to manipulate or, to cause.
That was my next question. Yeah.
So to see this with your own eyes, that was one of those times. Seeing the UFO that traversed the sky when John and I were out there, and later on investigating a Bigfoot case where I did witness this thing that people call Bigfoot with my own eyes, utilizing night vision and a FLIR or forward-looking infrared camera system, and to be able to witness these things, and even to this very day, I mean, the coins still occur. And recently I did a presentation in Farmington, New Mexico, and in and around that, I have a friend that was an investigator in a lot of these cases that is from the Dallas-Fort Worth area or that region, and he came up to see that presentation that I did. And when he was here, at least 25 coins manifested during that time, and right in front of us, and even to the point where I'm actually driving down the road and a coin comes bouncing off the dash and lands in his lap, and so there's still a lot of investigation to be done regarding the coin apport, what they call an apport or appearance of a coin. And but I've seen it. I've seen it with my own eyes, and no matter who questions that in the science field, yeah, they're open to question it. But again, unless that phenomenon happens to you, or you're there to witness it and capture it, whether that's on camera or whatever,
And
all of that other stuff don't really matter. I've seen it. I know it happens. It can happen.
This phenomena of the coins appearing, was this a phenomena that happened indoors as well as outdoors?
The first investigation, the original investigation, was inside a office facility that was, I think there was 3 levels in that particular office space, a basement area, the main floor where most of the work cubicles were, and then there was even a higher up area or space, but most of the phenomenon in and around that particular investigation was occurring indoors, although there was attachments to myself and other investigators where the phenomenon followed us to our homes, and we were experiencing the coins within our homes, and so
literally dropping from
out of thin air. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that is a particular conundrum. As you're speaking, I'm remembering a moment in my life, a very exciting time when I was roaming around Asia on my own for most of a year. And I came into a small village in central India. I don't know if it wasn't a tourist attraction or anything. And I was certainly a foreigner. And a man came forward and started to speak in Hindi in a loud, expressive way. He had a big coil of rope, like a ship's rope, substantial. Yeah. And several dozen people came from out of their small sandstone houses. Yeah. And we sat in a circle around this man, and open sky, nothing to hang anything on. Right. And I realized at a certain point, this is the Indian rope trick, is what it's usually called. And he laid the coil on the ground, and while he spoke, he just kept advancing it a few inches at a time, like this. And the rope stood steady. And at a certain point, it was 6 feet. It was 10 feet in the air. Yeah. It didn't matter that I was not part of this culture. We were all one in just, this can't be happening. And then at a certain point, with great showmanship, he simply went, bing, and it collapsed. And almost involuntarily, we all rushed in and grabbed part of the rope. Was there a wire in it or something? Right. I can only say I have no witnesses that I can refer to. This was more than 50 years ago, and I will never forget it. And there's no question in my mind that it had to be some kind of trick. And yet it seems impossible to me that, there is more to heaven and earth than dreamt of in our mortal philosophy. And the appearance of solid objects coming out of the sky or the ceiling that shouldn't be there. Right. You can drive yourself crazy trying to wonder, or simply accept, once again, that we live in a world where it seems to be most of the time 3 dimensions and what we're used to. Right. But things are not what they seem.
No, they are. No.
What, at a certain point, you had worked this job 23 years. Did you decide that at a certain point, it's time for me to retire and start on something new? Or what was your reasoning about leaving the work and moving on to the next chapter of your life?
Well, you have to understand that. So the Navajo Rangers are situated under the Division of Natural Resources. So there are at least like 12 other programs under the division. And in this day and time, there is a uh, such an issue in trying to achieve and maintain funding for these programs like the Navajo Rangers.
Yeah.
You know, you and I know that law enforcement is needed throughout that 27,000 square miles. You consider all of the natural resources of the Navajo Nation, be it the oil and the gas and the timber and the fish and game and the archaeological resources.
Yeah.
You know, when I left, there was 8 rangers remaining, and 8 rangers is not enough to cover that entire reservation. You can't. It's not possible.
Gosh.
And so, you know, in some of the latter years that I worked there, you know, I had worked as the chief ranger, and I had to deal with budgets, and I had to deal with the funding for these officers that I had, and trying to keep them equipped and trying to keep them safe in doing their job, keeping them trained. And
Yeah.
it was just such a challenge toward the end, and such a frustration, because John and I together had envisioned having a program that would be a state-of-the-art program, that would be a program that other tribes could aspire to achieve, you know, in training, in having appropriate equipment to do the job, and working with outside agencies in their coordination, and also having a state-of-the-art headquarter facilities that would be built in design like the old National Park Service buildings you see out near Grand Canyon and in these places with the log cabins. And we wanted to create something that these rangers could take pride in, as far as their headquarters and state-of-the-art training facilities, both firearms indoors and outdoors, and training facilities for the use of equipment like quads and ATVs and all-terrain, you know, equipment, and boats and all of that stuff. But it wasn't to happen. It wasn't to happen simply because, you know, it became a competition between tribes vying for funding, federal funding, to keep those programs running, and so it was just too negative, you know, trying to fight every single day, you know, and not only fight to keep your officers safe and fight to do the job, but infighting within the tribal government, and people not wanting you to succeed, you know, in that endeavor, you know, for like that ranger program. So it became a fight with that, and
What a shame.
at some point, you know, I felt I had achieved what I had set out to do with the Rangers program, and the experiences that I'd have, you know, even with the paranormal. I've always felt I was blessed to see and witness things that some people never see. Some people try to see the paranormal stuff, you know, in their lives, and some of them, I dare say, end up going to their grave without ever encountering this stuff, you know. But for me, I've been blessed, whether that's because I've worked it and opened myself up to experience this stuff, being open-minded and having witnessed so much different phenomena, you know, to know it's real, to know that it does happen, you know.
You remind me from the time that my sister and I, that my memory returned of our childhood sighting, and we discussed it and then talked about Helen's experiences. from that time, our parents were very supportive, but my
Yep.
father especially, a deep curiosity, and he started to read the books, meet
Yep.
colleagues. Um, he, I think back, he lived to be 98 and a half years old, and he had an opportunity to have dinner with Timothy Good and Nick Pope in London. He considered Richard Dolan a friend who would come by fairly regularly. Richard, a
Oh yeah.
historian, of course, and my dad
Okay.
living through history. And
Right.
there was one point of frustration for him. Um, he was very pissed off that he had never seen a UFO. And he felt the most credible witness that he had ever read about or read the work of was Travis.
Right.
Travis's book, Fire in the Sky, was first published in 1979, I think, is a book called The Travis Walton Experience. And my
Right.
dad read it. And for years, he'd be watching a documentary and call me into the room and say, "How come you're not on this documentary?" Which would always give me a
Right.
laugh. And I'm
Right.
sorry, Dad, they didn't hire me. But he said, "Travis Walton's the guy I want to meet." And before he died, about 2 years
Right.
before, Travis gave a talk in Ithaca, New York, and came and spent the afternoon with him. And it
Oh, that's
was
wonderful.
wonderfully gratifying
Right.
for me and for both of them, I think, as well. But yes,
Yeah.
whether you like it or not, you have had the opportunity
Yeah.
to see and experience things that other people might even not be able to dream about accurately. And at a certain point, you decided to write a book. Was that pretty much immediately after retiring, or did it come to you in some other way? What was the genesis of how the process started?
Well, actually, as John and I were working these investigations, for the most part, I was just as amazed at the information and the evidence that was coming out of these investigations, just like with the coins.
Yeah.
And I would be making my own personal notes in and about these investigations. I guess in the back of my mind, hoping that maybe one day that I could write something that could come to fruition to show people, and talk about these experiences that these people were having, my own experiences, and so I was already making notes as a ranger, and I dare say a lot of the book was already written by the time that I actually got behind a computer,
Yeah.
actually with a contract to write a book. Um, so everything was very natural as far as that process. For me, it's just more or less storytelling, me telling you what I've experienced and what I seen and
Yes.
uh, very natural. But it wasn't until John and I had done an episode with under Netflix under the program Unsolved Mysteries,
Sure.
who did a program with John and I called the Paranormal Rangers. I think it was season 3, episode 5 of Unsolved Mysteries on Netflix, and uh, so it was out there. And John and I had done work with Secret of Skinwalker Ranch and Beyond Skinwalker Ranch and Paranormal Emergency and all of these other television programs, and John also on Ancient Aliens, and it wasn't until some execs with HarperCollins Publishing, William Morrow, that seen that particular episode and contacted us and said, "Oh my gosh, I've seen your television program, and what you've experienced is really amazing, and I'd be really, if amazed if we could come together and work together to collaborate and write. You write a book, and both of us." And so I jumped on it immediately, and again everything fell in place, and I think I worked about 8 months straight, just hammering at it day and day, day and night, and completing the book really. And some people will start a book and it may go 2 years, 3 years sometimes, and that's just part of the process. And John started, going way back too, and his book is still in the works. He's working at it, and I hope to see his book completed someday. It would be amazing to be able to read his experiences. The approach he has is much different than the approach I took, and I would be the first one to buy his book, and I'm trying to get people to encourage him. John, keep at it,
Well, I
please
couldn't
do
agree
it.
with you more. And
Yeah,
I have to tell you, as somebody who has written books, had them published, well, by a major publisher, major-ish, and self-published at the same time, I've
Yeah.
never quite heard of a major publisher seeing,
Yeah.
one of us, so to say,
Yeah.
on a TV presentation, and they making the decision, as
Yeah.
opposed to the more traditional way of you going with a proposal, usually with an
Right.
agent. That
Right.
in itself is really very special. And
Right.
we all know,
Very true.
well, if you've written a book, then it's a process of self-discovery, of
Yeah.
frustration, of doing your best to stay regimented and get the job done, at the same time to be able to dream and bring those dreams to your narrative as well. At a certain point, you complete the manuscript, it's published. This is all very recent, and you get a public reaction that very few people do. And you start speaking for, everybody that's interested in hearing what you're doing, but you're getting invited to not just, a paranormal group or a local library.
Right.
You're speaking to publishers. And
Yeah.
can you tell us a little bit about how things went from, okay, your book is done and it's going to be available in bookstores and on Amazon, to all of a sudden you are interfacing directly with audiences. And for some of them, the paranormal is not normal. Also, there are rooms full of, white people, white executives, who are looking at you as a bit of an exotic, so to say. This is very interesting. Here's somebody who grew up on the reservation, obviously very different than me, but then hearing you speak and, wait a minute, this is stuff I can relate to on a certain level. Can you give us an idea of some of the experiences you've had with people specifically giving talks to different groups? Because it's a very rich variety, more than most of us have when we promote a new book.
Yeah. Well, long before the book was even started officially, John and I, going back to about 2009, began doing presentations for these groups like MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, and others that were making these requests. And having worked with our investigators who were really taking us under their wing to show us the processes that they were doing in their UFO investigation and things. And John and I would take that information and assimilate some of it into the investigation process that we had as law enforcement officers. And so we were already started in doing that for years and years. And even like, when we met under Travis Walton's event. And so we're already out there doing that kind of thing. And I can remember events like where John and I presented one year at Dulce. There was an elderly woman that came up to me and John, and She was in her mid 80s or close to 90 years old. And she came up to us after we gave our presentation. And she came up to us and gave us a big hug. And she had tears in her eyes. And she was a Hickory Apache woman. And she said, "Thank you for doing what you do, bringing this message, on these paranormal matters to the public." She said, and she went on to convey an experience she had as a young girl and seeing a UFO, an extraterrestrial. Her entire family was standing around her with their jaws wide open because she had never shared this even with her immediate family.
Wow.
And she was in her almost 90 years old, and they were kind of in shock, and really for me that hit home really so hard that it made me realize that there's so many people in our world that have had these paranormal experiences that they're keeping locked inside themselves for fear of being ridiculed. And I mean, we're just now seeing a lot of that coming into open talk by airline pilots and military pilots and people on a professional level that have these experiences, and it's just now becoming acceptable to share those experiences. And law enforcement. These officers are out there 24/7, patrolling at night, day and night, and having these experiences, but keeping it locked inside, not sharing it with others, even their fellow officers. A lot of times they don't even share it with, and so thank goodness today there's kind of an awakening that's going on that permits people having these experiences, to share with others. And there's a lot of more and more forums like what you are doing, the programs like Coast to Coast, and where people can come on and share their experiences and experience of others, and it's acceptable. It's the people realize that this stuff isn't just make believe. It's not fantasy. It's not hoaxing, or these things in general are real. And I would dare say, if you traveled the entire globe, I really believe you would be hard pressed to find a single family that does not have a family member somewhere in their family tree that has not had some sort of paranormal experience.
Right. Yeah.
Whether it's hauntings or seeing a Bigfoot or some type of shape-shifting thing, the Bigfoot phenomenon is global, international, and even the shape-shifting thing, with other tribes, and even going into Europe, and the lycanthropy thing with the werewolves, and we hear it, and in this country, and you kind of laugh about werewolves and things like that, but over there in Europe, it's a very real thing. You talk to some of these families, it is deathly real to them, and can be very terrifying to peoples. But we just need to be more respectful of each other and others' cultures, that we all have these experiences. And we tend to, even experiences with the paranormal and hauntings, we've been brainwashed into, oh, that was just the wind, the house just settling, or the wind blowing, or these kind of things, coming up with excuses to rationalize these experiences. And no matter where you go on this little blue planet, there have been other cultures and other peoples that have lived there before we came here, that have come and gone and lived. And no matter where we go, we're walking on the remains of other peoples. Sure, we come along and build our fancy Frank Lloyd Wright homes, and these skyscrapers and stuff, but there were once indigenous peoples that occupied those lands, that lived, and everybody has a soul. Everybody have a life force. And so those that have come and gone before us a lot of times their spirit and their soul or their, chi or whatever you want to refer to it is
Yeah.
still here with us,
Yeah.
in the ether, I guess, as they say.
Yes. I think one of the gifts of your book, for me, having read it in preparation for interviewing you, but also going through it again, just because it makes for really enjoyable reading. And
Thank you.
you're a great storyteller. I think potentially we all are, but some of us have decidedly more interesting or unusual stories to tell that are going to reach an audience that's, even if it's a bit anxious, they're curious. And I think there's something very validating about knowing that somebody who we identify as from a completely different culture, ultimately not that different in terms of our humanity, but they are documenting experiences that, my cousin told me about this, or I had this happen, or I saw this really good documentary and it characterized this, or this reminds me of something that I read in another book. It's a win-win situation. And as somebody who loves books as well as reading, I can only say, in my experience, the Paranormal Ranger it transcends the genre. Anybody that's interested in the world around them potentially would like to read this book. They just don't know it yet. It has that gift of, with no affect, it's just simply part of what happened when you wrote it, to cross over to a larger audience. Again, this book had the distinction a little over a month ago, of being named by the New York Times as one of the 22 nonfiction books you should read this autumn. Not one of the 22 paranormal books. This is an extraordinary compliment in a ferociously competitive field. And if you are a bibliophile or somebody that is building a library, it's a book that you would take pride in having in your library. I will be very curious to see. It's going to have, I think, a long publishing history because it's not time sensitive. And I think it's fair to say, and you know it as well as I, from the informal demographic we have of just being ourselves and attending events or speaking to people, every year now, more and more folks care less and less what other people think about what they think about this group of subjects, where 10 years ago, you wouldn't be very public with it. You might have a certain friend or group of friends, or if you went to a conference, it wasn't something you would necessarily advertise. And things are changing. Not as fast as some people would like, much too fast for other people, especially in the world of officialdom, who would like this whole thing slowed down to a degree. Stan, where can folks go to learn more about you? If you have a website or a destination that folks should check out.
Well, recently I started an Instagram account, having done some presentations, and the individual had requested me. And traditionally, as a law enforcement officer, you're not involved with social media that much. There are more and more bigger law enforcement agencies that have a social media component to their program, but historically, it wasn't something that law enforcement officers were a part of. So Jonathan Dover, Michelle Miners, and myself are on a YouTube podcast, Native Paranormal Crossroads. We get together every Wednesday and we share subject matter involving the paranormal and UFOs and even Native American issues and stuff. We get on there and present this stuff, and if people are interested in hearing different viewpoints, I welcome them to do that. The book itself is, if people are wanting to obtain the book, most Barnes and Noble will carry it, even your smaller bookstores. You can go online and look up HarperCollins and go under their books and enter the title, The Paranormal Ranger, and it'll come up. So they can access it pretty much anywhere.
That's great, and I'm glad
globally too. So yeah.
I'm glad you didn't automatically say Amazon. Of course, we can buy anything from them whenever possible.
True.
Independent bookstores are an endangered species.
They are.
If you can get your independent bookstore to order it for you, or get your library interested in the book, they should have a copy. If you're a high roller, buy a copy for a friend as a gift, or present a copy to a library. I've done that on a number of occasions with books, and you'd be surprised how grateful they are. I
presented some books to Fort Lewis College in Durango, Colorado. I did go to school there for a while. I have did presentations with the University of New Mexico, the Gallup branch here in Gallup, New Mexico. And I encourage all young people to write. Just sit down, grab a notepad, and begin writing something. We all have a story to tell, and a very valuable story. So please.
One last photo. This was really when we met in Heber. And a gift that you gave me at that time, which is very precious to me.
Yeah, the Navajo Ranger patch. Yeah.
Thank you always. I have it with pride. This is Peter Robbins, my very special guest tonight, Stanley Milford Jr., the book, The Paranormal Ranger, the show, Meanwhile Here on Earth. We'll see you next week. Take care.
Thank you, Peter. Bye.